Right. Okay. Okay, come on in, please. Just starting. We're here again, sadly, on Tisha B'Av, and I'm sure you've all heard more than once that it's sinas chinam, baseless hatred, that has destroyed our Beis HaMikdash. And so the people say, if sinas chinam destroy the Beis HaMikdash, baseless hatred destroy the Beis HaMikdash, what we need instead is we need avas chinam. We need love for no reason, for no other reason other than loving another Yid. But how does that work? What does that mean? You know, when you say people, you have to love every Jew, what does that really mean, you have to love every Jew? Do I really have to love every Jew? So I'd like to read to you, it was interesting that when I looked into it, it turns out that it's not as simple and straightforward as you think. I'd like to read to you from the Rambam. The Rambam speaks about Avas Hashem, and he speaks about Avas Yisrael, loving others, and the Rambam says the following. I'm going to translate this, I'll probably just paraphrase it if you don't mind. The way a person has been created, that his attitudes and his actions will follow those of his friends and the people that he hangs out with and those of his country. And therefore a person has to find himself tzaddikim, to be with chachamim, to be with clever and wise people. So you should always learn from them and keep away from evil people who go in bad ways, etc., etc. And then he goes through it. Then he says in Halacha Beis, this is in Perek Vav of Ichas Deres, Halacha Aleph, Beis and Gimel. In Halacha Beis, he then continues and he says, is a mitzvah lidabek b'chachamim, to cleave to chachamim, to learn from what they do, as it says, uvay sidbak. What does that mean, uvay sidbak? When it speaks to cleave to the Shekhinah, to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Come on in. How do you come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The answer is the way to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is by coming close to those people that are close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So coming close to Talmidei Chachamim, trying to spend time with them. You should try that his daughter should marry a Talmid Chacham, to eat together with them, to drink together with them, to do business with them, to try to be together with Talmidei Chachamim in any other way as you can. Because that will then allow a person to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he continues, this is Halacha Gimel, the Rambam says, Mitzvah kol adam le'elos kol echa v'echa miYisrael. A person has to love every Jew. Kigufoi, as he loves himself, as it says, v'hafta l'recha kamaycha. And now the Rambam goes and explains this for us, because it's not so straightforward. You wouldn't have really known what that means to love everybody, and we will come back to that in a minute. Lefichach, therefore, tzarich l'saba b'shvacha. You have to speak nicely about them. V'lachos amamoinai, and to be careful with their money. K'moi shuchas amamoin atzmai, in the way you'd want people to be careful with your money. V'roitze b'chavayt atzmai, and you'd want other people to give you cover. And then the Rambam finishes off another point, somebody who makes himself important by dragging other people down, he doesn't have a portion in the world to come. So the Rambam seems to be saying for us over here, that the way when we want to describe what does it mean, means speaking nicely about other people, being careful with other people's money, that is what it means. Now if I were to have asked you from the word get-go, how would you define v'hafta l'recha kamocha? What would you say the mitzvah of hafta l'recha kamocha is? I say you should love your neighbor as yourself. Speak nicely and just be careful with their money. That's it? Is that all you would have said v'hafta l'recha kamocha is? So it's very interesting that the Rambam says this, but before we get to this, in my first reading, by the way, of the Rambam, and this was the first way that I understood this before I saw other explanations, is that I thought the Rambam is saying there are really two things going on over here. If I ask you, how many friends do you have? So you might say to me, well, define friends. What do you mean, how many friends do I have? What does it mean, how many friends do I have? Well, how many people are you friendly with? What do you mean, how many people I have on my Facebook friends can have hundreds. I know people that have thousands. But that's not their friends. That's just people that's acquaintances. That's people that they know. They know their name. They know it's a friend's friend, and that's good enough. What's a real friend? What's a true friend? And therefore, the Rambam is telling us two things over here. The Rambam is saying that you can be friendly or you should love everybody. When it comes to V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, the Rambam is saying, love everybody. But there's beyond love. There's loving everybody, and then there's the next part of this, which is not only loving everybody, but who do I befriend? Who do I spend time with? Who do I make my closest friends? And that the Rambam says, you want to know who to be mizdabik with. Who do I spend my time with? Who do I cleave to? Who do I cling to? Who are the people that I will try to spend most of my time with and try to learn from, because they will influence the way I live? You find Talmidei Chachamim, you find tzaddikim, people that have good traits, that behave well, etc., etc. Those are the people that you want to be actually friendly with. And then everybody else falls under the category of acquaintances. You should like them. But Ramban, Nachmanides, and Malbim say something very important. And that's the following. When it comes to V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, when we come to discuss what it means, love your neighbor as yourself, we'll ask a simple question, and with that question you can always understand what the issue really is. What does that mean, love your neighbor as yourself? I'm about to buy myself a new car. Do I need to start buying a car for the entire street? You know, somebody comes over to you and says, well, if you love me like you loved yourself, if you're going out to dinner tonight, I'd like to come with you. Maybe you should pay for my dinner. That sounds ridiculous. And it is ridiculous because, I mean, where does it end? You can't love other people like you love yourself. More than that, I think everybody realizes and everybody knows that there's no such thing as loving other people as much as you love yourself. It doesn't work. You know, the next closest thing to me is my spouse, my wife, my children. But even the Torah tells us, when it comes, we have a Gemara that says you're walking through a desert and there's only one flask of water. If you split this flask of water together, you and your best friend, your spouse, whoever it might be, both of you will die. If you keep it for yourself, you'll live and somebody else will die. Says the Torah, v'chai bohem. You have to live. You have to keep it for yourself. So that means I means I should have to split it with someone else. I don't have to split it with anybody else. I keep it. So Torah is telling me absolutely not. There's no such thing that I have to love everybody else like I love myself. That's not even possible. But rather, I need to go ahead, says the Rambam and the Malbim, look at what it says. It doesn't say v'ahavta es re'acha kamocha, but v'ahavta le re'acha kamocha. Now you might turn around and say, well, what's the big deal? There doesn't sound much of a difference between the two of them. But the Rambam and Malbim say from there that we can learn when we say v'ahavta le re'acha kamocha, you should love your friend. Le re'acha means things that happen to him. Make sure, as Hillel says, what you don't like, don't do to anybody else. That is how he's describing V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You wouldn't want anybody to do you in a business. Make sure nobody does this other person in a business. You wouldn't want anybody else to speak not nicely about you. Make sure that you don't speak not nicely about anybody else. That is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That is all that V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha asks of us. So if that is all that V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha asks of us, and then we look at Avas Chinam, you speak about Sinas Chinam, baseless hatred, and Avas Chinam. So what does it mean? So if all it means is to love somebody for no reason, I don't have to love anybody. The Rambam just told me, the Malbim just told me, the Ramban just told me, I don't have to love anybody. Just don't talk badly about them. That's all it is. What's this Avas Chinam that we're talking about? And this Sinas Chinam that we're talking about? So I'd like to make a few comments about this, and I think with that we'll understand a little bit better. There's a story that I heard. It's a bit of a joke, but I think within that joke there's a lot of truth as well. There's a young woman that's sitting at the hairdresser, And as she's sitting at the hairdresser is talking to her. They have all these conversations. If you could be a fly in the wall in a hair salon, you would find out a lot of shocking things. But she's sitting there and she's doing her hair. And she says to this young woman, "You going anywhere nice on holiday?" She says, "Yeah, actually, I'm going to Rome." Ugh, a filthy city. Horrible place. Dirty and hot and humid. It's terrible. How are you getting there? Well, we're flying Continental. Flying Continental. I flew Continental once. Do you know how they treat you? They don't care about you. They squeeze you together. They try to get us, like squeezy jet. It's just the worst airline ever. You just won't enjoy the flight. They'll treat you horribly. The food is terrible. It's just awful. Where are you staying when you get there? We found a good deal at the Hilton Hotel. Oh, don't tell me you're going to the Hilton. What an awful dive. Show up there, the plasterboard is peeling and the paint is coming off and the toilets leak and the showers have no pressure. It's just the worst. Can't believe it. What are you doing? He said, well, we're going to go sightseeing and then we're going to go to the Vatican. The Vatican? What are you going to do in the Vatican? He said, in the Vatican, we're going to go see if we can see the Pope. Yeah, you and another million other people. I mean, the Pope has got no time to see you. What do you think the Pope is sitting there waiting for you to show up to say, "Hi, I'm here. Oh, I'd love to see you. Come on in." Okay. End of conversation. The woman goes on holiday. A few weeks later, as they do, she comes back to have her hair done again. And she sits down and the hairdresser is ready now. And she says, "So, how was your holiday?" Of course, expecting, she says, "Well, it was very nice. Thank you very much." "Really?" She said, "Let me tell you about it." She says, we got to the airport and we get to the Continental counter and we're standing there at the counter and the person standing behind the counter says, "Oh, I'm so sorry to tell you this. We've overbooked on economy." "So what do you mean you've overbooked on economy?" Yeah, don't worry about it. We have 2 seats in first class still left for you and your husband. Is that okay with you? Is that okay? "Yeah, well, of course we'll take them." Great. So we got upgraded to first class. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was in this Continental flight. They treated you like royalty. It was one of those lie-down beds. It was phenomenal. Okay, fine. How about the hotel? He says, "You can't believe it. We got to the hotel. We'd ordered a regular room, and it just wasn't ready yet." And I said, but we have ourselves. Yeah, you know what? We'll upgrade your room. We got a suite for you. A suite with air conditioning, with a big double bed, with a big bathroom. It's, everything just, an extra room. You have it. How about it? No extra money. So we took the suite. Fantastic. The Hilton was great. The hairdresser's starting to get a little bit, antsy over here. So she says, well, what was the city like? She says, "You won't believe it. They've cleaned up the place. It used to be a dirty place. They've cleaned it up. There was great weather. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't too schwitzy. We're walking around. It was brilliant. People spoke English and they didn't ignore us. And it was a great place to go. It was really wonderful to go sightseeing there and the Colosseum and all the other things we saw in Rome. It was amazing." "How about the Vatican?" "Oh, we went to the Vatican. We did go to the Vatican." He says, and then he says, "Well, we're standing online with everybody else to go see the Vatican. And somebody taps me on my shoulder. And I turn around and standing next to me is a Swiss soldier." The Vatican has Swiss soldiers. Standing next to me is a Swiss soldier. And we're like, "Oh," he goes, "The Pope would like to see you." "Me?" "Yeah, you and your husband. Pope would like to see you." Wow, amazing. So we came in and we sat down with the Pope, and the Pope says to us, "So how's it been? How's your trip been?" Well, we told him about the Continental flight, and we told him about this, and we told him about that. He says, "Sounds like you had a great trip. I have to give you one just good piece of advice. I'm glad you've come to Rome. I'm glad you've come to see me. One piece of advice. Yeah, your hair's awful. You need another hairdresser." There are people in our lives that moan about everything. I don't know how many people you know like that, but there are people, everybody has people in their lives. They are so negative. And everything that comes forward from them is so negative. And everything they want, they just, when things are bad, then it's great. You know, if you show up at a simcha and everything's good, there's nothing to talk about. The food was good, the kala looked nice, the kala's parents looked nice, the mechutanim looked nice, and the room was done up nicely. Shame. Okay, how was the chasna? What a shame. There's nothing to say. Just regular. So you come to a chasna and, you know, the kala's makeup wasn't great, and the caterer had burned the chicken, and the music was a little bit too loud. Oh, Baruch Hashem, you can come home, you have what to talk about. You can rank out the entire chasna. It wasn't worth going. I shouldn't have gone. I knew it, and I spent money on a babysitter also, and I didn't get my regular babysitter. It was an expensive babysitter, and they came, and all this for that. That's what I did that all for. Everything is negative. Avas chinam means to start ridding yourself of that negativity. Now, I'm sure nobody here is like that hairdresser, but everybody has some negativity inside them. Everybody has something inside them, this is no good or that's no good. And avas chinam means, instead of looking at negative within people, start looking for the positive, start looking for the good points in people. Because in every person, no matter who, you will find positives. You will find things to look up to, and you will find things that are wonderful. And stop looking for all the bad and complaining about the airline and about the hotel and everything else, when in reality, one of the other things, those people that complain about everything, you know what everybody bothers about them? Everyone complains about them. If you're negative, everyone's negative about you also. So that's the first point to understand. Stop doing damage to others and instead embrace other people. I heard another story. An interesting story. Rav Shlomo Schachter tells a story about a young couple that were having terrible shalom bayis problems. Terrible. Arguing constantly, and everything was no good, and everything was an argument. You know, you had these, sometimes you go to people and sadly they don't get on, the husband and the wife, and you want to slink out of there. You want to get out. You don't know how to. It's so uncomfortable sitting there. I've been to people like that, and you just sit there and you want to leave. I've told this story here in Shul before, but I don't know if I've told it to this audience. I was at somebody's house. I was staying by someone for shidduchim. I was going out with someone. I was in a city that I won't mention. Wasn't here. And woke up in the morning. I'd gone to Shachris, came back, and the husband says, "Come, I'll make you breakfast." And he starts making me an omelet. And he made me an omelet with cheese. Now, I'm not fond of omelet with cheese, but big deal, he made me an omelet with cheese. Who cares? But the wife said, "You made him an omelet with cheese?" So, yeah. "Don't you realize he's going on a date?" "Yeah." "You know what that's going to do to his stomach?" "I made him an omelet with cheese. He'll eat it." "He's not going to eat it." They were arguing about that omelet. You know, you're sitting there saying, "Can I have cornflakes?" Just you know, you don't know what to do with yourself in such a situation. So you have this couple here that are terrible shalom bayis, and they're constantly at each other, and they're basically about to get a get. They're basically about to get divorced. And one day they're sitting with each other, and again they're having a go at each other, and the husband is sitting there and eating, and the wife looks at him and he goes, "Look at you now." And he says, "What?" "What's that on your ear?" "Kind of horrible mole. You're looking terrible. What is that thing?" "I don't know. Looks disgusting." Ugh, part of you. Anyway, he doesn't know what to do with himself. So again, another comment that she made, but he goes to the mirror and he has a look, and he's got a mole on his ear. So he goes to the doctor and he says, "Look, I didn't have a mole. I didn't used to have a mole on my ear. You know, yeah, nothing. Feels it, yeah, that's you know, it doesn't protrude, it's not a problem, not an issue. You know what? You feel better, you want to feel better about it, we'll send it for a biopsy." So they take a bit off and they send it for a biopsy, and he comes a week later, he comes and sits down in the doctor's office, and the doctor says to him, "Okay, we're going directly from here to hospital." "What do you mean?" "So you're going directly from here to hospital, it's dangerous, you have to have treatment." And he goes to hospital and he has treatment, and Baruch Hashem, he survived. And Rav Shlomo Schachter turned around to this fellow and he says, "So what was the end of the story?" He goes, "What do you mean? We've been happily married now for the last 25 years. He says, "What? But you were about to get divorced. That was it. It was the end of your marriage. What happened? Right? That she was nitpicking at everything. He says, yeah, but you know what I realized? I realized HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me a nitpicking wife that saved my life. If my wife hadn't picked at that mole and told me off about it, I'd be long gone. The doctor said to me, this could have killed you. And the only reason I survived is because of her. And I realize now that, you know what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends you people in your life, and sometimes even difficult people in your life. And the difficult people in your life have been put there by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes you can get away from them, and sometimes you cannot. And if you cannot get away from those difficult people, you know what that means? That means HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects you to find a way to get on with these people, by hook or by crook. Find a way to make it work. That's Avas Chinam. That's what it means to love other people and to love someone for no alternative motive, for no reason. You have somebody and they're annoying, they have an annoying habit, or they do something that annoys you. So if you don't have to be friendly with them, fine, don't be friendly with them. But if you do, then find a way to make it work anyway. Because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu has put these people in your life, He's put them in your life for a reason. That's where we realize what Avas Chinam is. But there's one other point that I'd like to make. And we'll tell a story and we'll finish with that. And that is, I heard somebody discussing recently a certain issue. And he said, you know what? This is an issue of affluent and well-to-do people. He says, and let me explain to you. He says, I don't mean wealthy people. But when people have big problems in their lives, the little things disappear. Nobody focuses on whatever the problem was in that specific instance. When you have real serious things, if you cannot put bread on the table, if you have children that are ill, if you have a spouse, God forbid, that's ill, any of these tragedies that you might have, when people talk to you about Narishkeit and you say to them, it's Narishkeit, and don't you realize I got so much more important things to worry about? Why are you bothering me with the stupidity? But when everything is good, that's when people start complaining. That's when the food is no good at a chasna, etc., etc. You know, those people that sadly never get invited to simchas, when they get invited to simcha, they're just overjoyed. They'll never complain about what they have over there because Baruch Hashem, somebody invited me to a simcha. If you go to 50 simchas a year, you'll find what's wrong in every simcha because I can't go to 50 simchas and not make a comment about some of them. It's because we have so much. Because we live in a world of plenty, that we have it so easy, that we therefore turn around and start picking at other things. So imagine the situation. Imagine the liberation. There'll be lots of talk about the Holocaust here later, there'll be films and whatever, but imagine the liberation. Imagine the day that either whether it was the Russians or whether it was the Americans came into certain concentration camps and liberated that camp. And now finally the Jews were freed. You think one Jew turned around to the other and go, you're Sephardi, I don't like people like you. You were just so happy that we all survived. We were just so excited that there was another Jew to share anything with. You didn't look and start looking at them and see what nusach they davened or how Heimish they were or what type of hat they wore or whether they wore a hat at all. Who cares? It was another Jew, Baruch Hashem. Today we live in a situation where Baruch Hashem we have so many Jews. Thank God, that's how it should be. But because there are so many, there's so many to choose from. So there's a whole bunch of them that I don't like. Because when there's only a few Jews out there, when there's only a few of us, we band together and we stick together. When there's a lot of us, there'll be a whole bunch of people that I can't stand. So because God has been good to us, because He's been nice to us, because He's given us plenty, and He's given us peaceful times where we can live in peace and harmony, therefore we should dislike His people? If we know what it's like to like his people when things are no good, then imagine if things were no good and like people just that way. And the last story that I read last night that I found very, very moving, and I think with this we will conclude. The fellow Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson speaks brilliantly. You can get a shiur on Torah anytime. And he writes the following story. He says that he has a brother that lives in Manhattan, and his brother's been giving shiurim for many years, and those shiurim have been quite popular. And one day his brother's sitting and giving his shiur, and in walks a young man who's obviously disabled. Not severely disabled, but disabled. And he sits down, and he listens to the shiur, and he participates a little bit. And afterwards, this Rabbi Jacobson walks over to this young man and says to him, "Hello, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? Where are you from? What's your name?" He has a conversation with him. And he finds out that this young man has whatever condition it might be. He says, "Right." He says, "Then where do you live?" He says, "Well, I live by myself in wherever it might be, just around the corner." He says, "You live by yourself? That's such a shame. What about your parents?" He says, "When I was born, my parents couldn't deal with the fact that I was disabled. And so they gave me up. And they send every month a decent check. They're well-to-do people. They send a decent check to allow me to be able to live to a certain bank account, and I'm able to live off that. But they have nothing to do with me." He says, "Do you know where your parents live?" He says, "Yeah, a few blocks down the road from over here." He says, wait a minute, I don't understand this. He says, "Your parents live a few blocks in this direction. You live a few blocks in the other direction. That means you live about 5 to 10 blocks away from each other. And you've never met." Can you close that? Just making a lot of noise, sorry. Sorry about that. "You mean you've never met them?" He says, "No." "But they send you money every month?" "Yeah." And you've never even... "No, they're not interested in seeing me. They're not interested in meeting me." And the Rabbi Jacobson felt, how can that be? Parents here, that they just don't want to meet their own kin? So he found out their name, and he got himself a phone book, and he picked up the phone, and he calls, he says, "Hello, yes, hello. Is this Mr. So-and-so?" "Yes. My name is Rabbi Jacobson. I give a shiur in such and such a place. I've just met your young son." "Who?" "You know, your son, the one that's disabled." "I'm sorry," click. So I thought maybe the guy made a mistake and hung up on him by mistake, so he called back. Rabbi says, "Hello, yeah, it's Rabbi Jacobson again. Did you not get the point?" He says, "What?" "We want nothing to do with him. Goodbye." Hangs up the phone. This fellow thinks to himself, how can it be parents want nothing to do with their own child, their own flesh and blood? They're the affluent people. They live around the corner. Come on. Figures he'll wait another week. A week later, he tries calling the same number again. This time a woman picks up. So he figures, oh, Baruch Hashem, I got the mother. That she might be, maybe she's a little bit more sympathetic. "Hello, yes, Mrs. So-and-so. Yes, my name is Rabbi Jacobs." I introduces himself. I give a shiur. There's a young man that came to the shiur, very nice young man, and he starts discussing, and suddenly he hears this hesitation on the other end of the phone. "Your son would like to meet you." "Well, we don't..." So he says, "Come on. It's your child. You're his mother. Are you telling me you carried this child for 9 months and you don't even want to see him?" "Okay, give me a week. Call me back in a week." Calls back a week later. He says, "I've called you back a week later." He says, "You know what? We're not sure." He says, "Come on. It's your son. He wants to see you." He says, "Okay, fine. Where should we meet?" Make a time. and place to meet. And they come inside, and he brings the young man, and the young man is now sitting opposite his parents. And you can imagine what the situation is like, because here you have a young man who's never met his parents before. You have parents that are looking at their child that they gave up 30 years ago, that they've been supporting financially. But other than that, there's been nothing else there. Start talking about the weather. You know, it's one of those very, very uncomfortable situations. And Rabbi Jacobson says he didn't know what to do with himself. He wanted to start saying something. And finally, the young man who had a bit of a speech impediment because of his disability speaks up and he says something. I want you to know something. I want you to know one thing, Mommy and Daddy. When I was born, for whatever reason, God decided that he didn't want me to be perfect, in inverted commas. He didn't give me a body functional like he's given to everybody else. I have certain issues, I have certain disabilities. But I live with him. But I'll tell you something else. God didn't make you perfect either. Nobody is perfect in this world. And I understand that things were difficult for you. And I understand at the time that you might not have been able to deal with having a child that had disabilities. I really understand that. And I'd like you to understand that I've forgiven you for your imperfections. And all I ask of you is to forgive me for my imperfections. And the mother burst into tears, went over and hugged her child, and the father started crying. And Rabbi Jacobson realized it's time for me to just slink out, and he said goodbye, and he walked out. Do you want to know what Avas Chinam is and what Sinas Chinam is? That story is just so powerful. We all have imperfections. Every single one of us has something that's wrong with them. Whether it's our temperament, whether it's the way we talk about other people, whether it's the way we talk to other people, whether it's the way we treat our children or our spouses or our parents or our friends, whatever it might be. Everybody, there's not a single person in this room that could tell me they're perfect. And we look away from those imperfections because we love ourselves. Start looking away from other people's imperfections. I forgive myself for my imperfections. Start forgiving other people for theirs. That's what Avas Chinam is. That's what it means to love every other Jew. You might not have a mitzvah to love every Jew. I might not have to buy him everything in the world. I might only have to speak nicely about him and not make sure that his money doesn't go down. But what about his imperfections? What about the fact that he has issues? Why does that mean that I have a right to feel myself one up on him? I don't. And I never will. I'm imperfect. He's imperfect. We're all imperfect. Start looking away from those imperfections. Start looking away from those problems and start looking at the real people that are behind there. That's when you can start talking about Avas Chinam. Start loving people for what and for whom they are. Ronald Reagan came in 1987 to the Berlin Wall, and he turned around to President Gorbachev and says, "This wall is evil and it needs to come down. The wall that is between us is evil and it needs to come down." It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a mechitza shel barzel, a whatever that means in realistic terms, but there's a mechitza, a wall, a boundary between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we have the power to break it down, to rip it down, because we realize it's evil. And how are we going to do that? Stop looking at everybody else's imperfections. Forgive everybody else for the things that they do wrong, in the same way you forgive yourself for the things that you do wrong. Mirz Hashem, This will be the final Tisha B'Av. It'll be the final time we have to sit here together at such a program. Next time, Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim. Amen.